Welcome to the Prophecy Club, and I've got Rob Skiba on the phone today. We're going to continue talking with him. He's the author of 2 books, creator, writer, producer of probably is going to be a digital web series called The Seed, and filmmaker. As a matter of fact, this guy's busy. I barely even get him on the phone to do radio programs. But when he comes, he's going to be making 3 DVDs, and you really want to make plans to come and hear it. Now, here's the way it is. Saturday. This is July 20th in the afternoon. It starts 2 to 5 p.m. is Mythology, UFOs, and Strong Delusion. Then Saturday, July 20th, 7 to 10:30 is The Rise of Babylon 322, Tetrads, and the Time of Jacob's Trouble. Just say it real fast. Doesn't sound like much. And then Sunday morning, 9:30 at the Spirit of Prophecy Church, same location. 2045, the year man becomes immortal. Fascinating topics from a fascinating speaker. So, Rob, welcome back to the Prophecy Club.
Thank you, Stan. Glad to be here.
Okay, well, give us an overview of what you're going to be sharing in those 3 DVDs, please.
Yeah, well, the first presentation, Mythology, and it's going to be dealing with the coming great deception. A lot of people wonder what that is. Anybody who's read the scriptures knows that there was a time when Jesus spoke with his disciples on, many call it the Olivet Discourse. They asked Jesus, what's it going to be like when you come back? And he gave them a bunch of signs. And one of the things he said is that there's going to be a deception that's coming. It'll be so great that even the elect could be deceived by it. And in my research, I realized that part of that great deception may have to do with mythology, and it may not be a coincidence that every kid that goes through secular school has to read the Odyssey and the Iliad and things like that. You know, they can read all about the Greek gods, but you bring in the Bible, and no, you can't do that. So I'm going to cover a lot of ground in that first presentation dealing with mythologies and the gods of the ancient world and why God said in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt have no other gods before me. So we're going to deal with a lot of stuff in that first presentation. Then in the second one, 322 Tetrads, the Time of Jacob's Trouble, I'm going to deal with the subject of Babylon Rising, which is the title of my first book. And we're going to talk about 322 is sort of an enigmatic number that is found in the occult. Specifically, you'll see it underneath on the logo of the Skull and Bones. Underneath the logo for the secret society, the Skull and Bones, is a skull on top of a pile of bones, and this number 322 underneath it. That everybody's trying to figure out what's that about. I think I may have discovered some things, and so I'm going to share that, as well as talk about the Tetrad cycles that are coming up on the Lord's feast days. Pastor Mark Biltz, back in 2008, I believe it was, discovered that there's a series of Tetrads, which is NASA's term for blood red moons that happen in a sequence. When you have blood red lunar eclipses 4 in a row, it's called a tetrad. And it just so happens to be that they're not unusual in and of themselves, but these are landing on the feasts of the Lord. We read in the book of Leviticus, for instance, where it talks about all the different feasts, the 7 feasts, the spring feasts, the Pentecost, and the fall feasts. Well, there's some unusual eclipse activity taking place in that time frame, but they're also happening in the 2033 and 34 time frames. So I'm going to talk about that, and what I believe the Bible is talking about when it says the time of Jacob's trouble, because Isaiah 46:10 says that God declares the end from the beginning. So if I want to understand things that are happening, like say in the book of Revelation, I should go back and look at what's going on in Genesis.
I agree.
And so, yeah, and we see in Genesis that God put the sun and the moon and the stars to be for signs and for seasons and things like that. And when it talks about Jacob's trouble, though, if you go back to Genesis, you'll see that Jacob's trouble actually lasted 20 years. It says it in a few places. So this is speculation on my part. I consider myself a researcher and a student. So all I'm going to do is put forth my findings and just see what the audience thinks about it. But I've got some theories that based on Mark Bilt's work and the Tetrad cycles and 322 and Skull and Bones and the occult and what Genesis has to say about Jacob's trouble.
And what about 2045, the year man becomes immortal?
Yeah, that one, there was a Time magazine article that came out a year or two ago that showed a picture on the front cover of a guy with a plug in the back of his head, and it said 2045, the year man becomes immortal. And so I'm going to talk about the Archon invasion. I'm actually going to take people all the way back to Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to work our way forward to the year 2045. And we're going to talk all about transhumanism and the Nephilim, and all kinds of subjects like that, but see what scientists are doing, what their goals are to basically achieve what I would consider to be a counterfeit immortality. So we'll talk about that in that presentation.
Okay. Well, my first question is 322. I have an idea on that, but I can't wait to hear yours. What is 322?
Well, I'm not going to give it all away, but 322 is a very interesting number, and I started to keep an eye on 322 and just start looking for things related to it, related to those numbers 322, because I've discovered that the occult likes to do things with symbols. They love it. Freemasons and those type of people, their language is symbols, and the reason for it is because symbols conceal from those who don't have eyes to see, and they reveal for those who do have eyes to see. So to coin a phrase, in the movie The Matrix, take the red pill. If you take the red pill, your eyes will become open to some things, and you start seeing things for what they are, I believe. And I've started to take a look at different things related to 322, and I put together a video that I call the Omega Plan. And the Omega Plan, we're going to talk about this. This is chapter 6 of my first book, but it's a 22-minute video, I believe, covering roughly 25 years worth of American history, and traces some things that presidents say and news reports about various things that I believe are related to what I call the Omega Plan, a timeline of events that are ushering in the New World Order. And I really kind of start with September 11th, 1990, when George H.W. Bush announced his plan for a New World Order, and then we work our way forward from there, exploring some things. And I don't know if your listeners are aware of the Georgia Guidestones. These are very interesting. It's a very interesting monument. I think it's in Elberton, Georgia, that declares the New World Order's intent, what they're planning to do with a new set of 10 commandments. And the first one is keep and maintain the world population at 500 million. Well, you're really going to have to stop and think about that, because
that kills 11 out of 12 people.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're talking 6.5 billion people have to die for their first commandment to be kept. That's pretty frightening, if you think about what they're trying to do. So I'm going to talk about things like eugenics. I'm going to talk about the Nazis and what they were doing. I'm going to talk about the fact that under Project Paperclip, a large number of those Nazis came over to America and plugged themselves into education and science and NASA and government and all kinds of facets of our country, and reveal that I think that there is an agenda at play to bring about the rise of the New World Order. Now, regarding the Georgia Guidestones, they just so happen to have been erected on March 22nd, 322. So.
I hadn't heard that one before. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that among many other things are related to 322. Like, for instance, on the early morning of March 22nd, again, 322, 2003, that was the date that the United States unleashed the full measure of its, quote, shock and awe campaign against Iraq. And that's actually a play on words based on Shekinah, shock and awe, and their occult twisted view of it. And as noted, the numbers 322 appear prominently on the logo for the Skull and Bones Secret Society, of which both Prescott Bush, George W. Bush's grandfather, or George H.W. Bush's father, and both presidents, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, were both members of Skull and Bones. So I'm going to talk about how I really don't believe our presidents are elected. I believe they are selected.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, people have to understand that all 44 of our presidents are related to one guy, King John Lackland, the King of England, signer of the Magna Carta in the 1200s. So I have to ask, what are the statistical odds if we supposedly have presidents of the people, for the people, by the people, like we were taught? What would the statistical odds be that they're all related to each other and all related to one guy?
Okay, so you're saying that the presidents are of the king, for the king, and by the king.
Well, I would actually say they are of the Illuminati, by the Masons, for the elite, or something of that nature.
Very good.
Yeah, they want to keep it in the family, so to speak. Some of these presidents, like for instance George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, are related, are members of the Skull and Bones Society. And what people need to understand is when any public official that's in, somebody that's in position like a congressman or, a public office, presidency, whatever, if they have taken an oath in a secret society, people have to realize that that oath supersedes any other oath they take in any other public office afterwards, which means their allegiance is to that and not to the American people.
Well, same thing in the Catholic Church. They've taken an oath. Many of them, I think it's the Jesuits, that says that their oath to the Pope is above every other oath.
Right, exactly. And so I tell people, I'm like, look, if your favorite candidate of choice has any affiliation with the secret society, you need to turn the other way and have nothing to do with it, because you're dealing with fire.
Yeah, but the question is whether a vote really even counts. Do you think our vote counts, or do you think they're doctoring the votes?
Honestly, I don't. I used to be very politically active. Always doing my patriotic duty to vote and get the vote out and contribute financially to various campaigns and stuff like that. For instance, I was a huge Ron Paul fan back the first time around, 2008.
And then.
And then, when you saw what happened to that guy, what the media did to him, I really began to question the whole procedure. That's what really got me started in this research in the first place. And then somebody that you have no understanding of came out of nowhere. Nobody knows anything about the man, and the guy spent millions and millions of dollars to cover up his birth certificate and his history and everything else. And this guy becomes president. I'm like, okay, there's a problem here. So as I started looking into all this, I realized the whole thing's a big scam. And I can't do it anymore. I mean, that's just me. I'm not.
Well, let me say something about that scam. As a matter of fact, you folks out there listening, if you can help me with this, please pass the information along. Someone contacted me and said there was a fellow that was doing radio interviews talking about how it's called vote scam, and they could go in and manipulate the votes to see that their candidates won. In other words, it's basically going to the computer and just changing the votes.
Right.
We'll be right back after this message. In the Rob Skiba gift offer, his first DVD is Mythology, UFOs, and the Coming Great Deception. Topics are the origin of mythology and the gods, Sumerian, Egyptian, and Greek pantheons, the Coming Great Deception, UFOs and aliens, Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, interdimensional portals, transhumanism and the quest to be like gods, giants and hybrids, paganism in Washington, D.C., America's date with destiny, and in Babylon Rising, 322 Tetrads and the time of Jacob's trouble. The topics are the signs in the heavens, Babylon in the last days, New World Order conspiracies, secret societies, and the occult's obsession with the numbers 322, Tetrads, or blood red moons, in the eclipses in the days ahead, Jesus coming as a thief in the night, the feasts of God and how they relate to the last days, the tribulation survival plan, and 2045, the year man becomes immortal. Topics will be Genesis 6 Nephilim, hybrid humans, war with hybrids, hybrids among us, the injection of immortality. All 3 DVDs valued at $90, available for a gift of just $50 at prophecyclub.com. And Rob will be speaking Saturday afternoon, July the 20th from 2 to 5 p.m. and 7 to 10:30 p.m. and then Sunday morning beginning at 9:30 on those 3 DVDs. And that's on the corner of Park and K in Plano, 2540 K Avenue in Plano. And now, back to the program. In other words, it's basically going to the computer and just changing the votes.
Right.
Through all of my searching, I have not been able to find the guy. So if anybody out there knows how I could reach, I would love to interview somebody about that. Vote scam.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many reports did we see about, caucuses and stuff like that, where there was voter fraud and everything like that, and, dead people, superheroes, and dogs are casting votes. It's like, come on. I mean, how much do we have to see before we realize we're being scammed? And, we're basically in a two-party dictatorship. Democrats and Republicans, there's really no difference. I like the way Judge Napolitano put it. He said they're two wings of the same bird of prey. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with that completely. And speaking of wings of birds, the eagle that everybody thinks is the American eagle, Manly P. Hall is one of the most prolific writers of Freemasonry, said, no, it's a symbol. It represents the phoenix. And the phoenix in the Egyptian mythology is the Bennu, which is the soul bird, the dying and resurrecting soul bird of Osiris, which is the god of this country. where it says "In God We Trust" on the back of your dollar bill. No, it's convenient that they put it all in capital letters. In our Judeo-Christian way of reckoning the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we spell it with a capital G and then little o-d. All pagan gods, we spell it all lowercase. Well, they put it all in uppercase to hide the fact that all of the iconography, that is a talisman. The back of your dollar bill, I believe that thing is a talisman. What is a talisman? Well, it's an object infused with occult symbols and power. They infused it with an evil agenda, I believe. It's telegraphing their plan. We'll talk about that this weekend as well, what I believe their plan is. But it all deals with Osiris, who is Nimrod, and we talk about that in the first presentation, Mythology and the Coming Great Deception, how it traces back to Nimrod, and how really our government and our presidents, going all the way back to George Washington, have had their allegiance to Osiris Nimrod. And that's who their allegiance is to. That's the God that they are serving. It's not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we have to be careful when a politician says that they're a Christian, because they know how to play the card. They're playing the Christian card to get the vote, which doesn't really matter anyway, but all it's doing is showing your endorsement for what, who and what they are. For instance, George H.W. Bush was asked if he was a Christian, and he first stumbled over his words, and they said, well, if you mean, have I been born again, then yes, I'm a Christian. Oh, well, we all heard our Christianese, so we got very excited about it. Yay!
The problem is the Skull and Bones have another baptism like that to another birth too, right?
That's right. They lay down naked in a casket, do all kinds of perverse sexual activity, and then when they come up out of the casket, they say, congratulations, brother, you have been born again, ... into the Skull and Bone Society. So he played us. Jesus said, we shall know them by their fruits, not by their campaign slogans. So we have to go and try them. We have to test the spirits to see whether they be of God. We have to look at their associations and look at their fruits to see if what they're saying is really true. And I would suggest that most, if not all, of our presidents were not Christians.
Probably right. Okay, let's jump over to the Tetrads. I have a lot of things I want to say about that. Tell us about the Tetrads.
Like I said, back in, I believe it was about 2008, Pastor Mark Biltz, an individual who had discovered that there's some interesting cycles that are coming up in the years 2014 and 2015.
Right, I've had him as a guest, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so then you're well aware of what he had discovered. It's pretty fascinating stuff, really.
Yeah, but let's assume they don't know, so go ahead and tell them.
Okay, well, like I said earlier, a tetrad is what is NASA's definition of when you have 4 blood moons kind of in a row. And there's nothing really unusual about those. They happen fairly often, but when they land specifically on the feast days of our God, that's something that we might want to pay attention to. Again, going back to Genesis, he says he put those things up there for signs and for seasons, right? And days and years and things like that. Well, and let me just go ahead and tell you when they are. Mark Biltz discovered it, and I checked it myself. Like I said, I'm a researcher. That means I research what other people search. And so I found that it's true that on the Passover, second day of unleavened bread, on April 15th, 2014, there's a blood red moon. On the Feast of Tabernacles in October 8th, 2014, there's a blood red moon. On the first month of the Hebrew calendar, which is in that particular year, 2015, is March 20th. Month 1 is a total solar eclipse. Then on Passover, April 2nd, 2015, is a blood red moon. Then on the Feast of Trumpets, September 13th, 2015, is a partial solar eclipse. And then again, on the Feast of Tabernacles, September 27th, is a blood red moon. So Pastor Mark Biltz, 119 Ministries, and others have done research on this and shown that these things tend to be like omens almost for the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, when these types of signs show up. And so it's caused a lot of people to look at these carefully. Now, at the time when they first discovered this, I know Mark Biltz and 119 Ministries and others were suggesting that the day of the Lord, based on the signs and the seasons and what the prophets have to say about this, the moon turning the blood and the sun being darkened and things like that, they suggested that based on these signs, it appears that the following year, 2016, Feast of Trumpets, may be the day of the Lord. And, they're being watchmen. They're looking at the signs and they're saying what they think they mean.
Yeah, well, what do you think? Is that the day of the Lord, as in the day of the rapture, as in the day of Armageddon, the day Jesus returns?
I do not believe so.
I don't either.
And I came on record and said this because according to their thesis, and we'll cover this in the presentation, but they believe that if that was the day of the Lord, then you have to back off 1,260 days to find the abomination of desolation, right? Well, what caught my attention was if you back off 1,260 days from the supposed day of the Lord, which was September 1st, I think, or 16th, or something like that, 2016, whatever it was. If you back off 1,260 days, you land on 3/22/13. So March 22nd of this year. And so they were speculating that could be the abomination of desolation. Well, it's a very interesting thing happened. I do not believe Obama is the Antichrist, and a lot of people do.
I agree.
He just so happened to be in Israel on 3/22/13, and so a lot of people who were subscribing to what Mark Biltz and 119 Ministries were talking about were, keenly aware of what he was doing and thinking, of course, they think he's the Antichrist, so they're like, look, he's in Israel, and he could be standing on the spot where the holy place was, and he was there on 3/22/13, and I went on record prior to March 22nd and said that's not going to happen. It's not it. Okay, I don't believe it is it. And the reason I said that is because, well, there's way too many signs still left unfulfilled, for one thing. I'm also not a pre-tribulation rapture guy, and I know you're not either.
Yay!
So, and I'm like, we're all still here, and, there are a lot of things I just didn't agree with. But what I discovered was, actually, it was a friend of mine, Kevin Roberts, he discovered it, and I researched what he had discovered, that there is a similar Tetrad cycle with blood moons as well as solar eclipses that happens, and I think it's actually more impressive than what's happening in 2014 and 15 in the years 2033 and 34. And that actually fits, in my mind, a better timeline for when I think the end might be, 14 and 15. But those are the ones that fit the scriptures regarding what happens before the day of the Lord. Then we have to look at the signs that are supposed to happen on the day of the Lord and see, what's going to happen, and literally. And it just so happens that there is a partial solar eclipse that happens on the Feast of Trumpets in 2016, which they believe fits that scripture. But there's something even more impressive on Feast of Trumpets in the year 2034, and that is a total solar eclipse, but it's what's called an annular solar eclipse. And what that means is the moon is completely over the sun, but it's further out in its orbit. So the effect is it looks like a huge, like a Lord of the Rings kind of freaky looking sign in the sky, like a big glowing ring of fire, basically, in the sky. I think it's a very impressive sign, to be sure. But we have on March 30th, which is day one of the Hebrew calendar in 2033, is a total solar eclipse. On Feast of Unleavened Bread, April 14th, is a blood red moon. Feast of Trumpets, September 23rd, is a partial solar eclipse. Tabernacles, October 8th, 2033, is a blood red moon. 2034, on the beginning of their Hebrew calendar, month one is March 20th is a full solar eclipse. And then on Feast of Unleavened Bread, April 3rd, blood red moon. And then Feast of Trumpets, September 12th, annular solar eclipse. So
okay, let's go back to the first set of tetrads. What now? This is supposed to be telling us that something big is going on with Israel. What do you think that might be?
I don't know, and this may be controversial, but I actually struggle with this thing we call Israel right now. There are just so many scriptures. In fact, I got a whole page of scriptures that I worked on this weekend, listening to somebody else's teaching on the patterns of redemption and exile in the prophets. And if you look at all of the prophecies regarding the ingathering in the last days and the creation of the state of Israel according to the Bible, what happened in 1948 it doesn't fit, quite frankly. So I don't know. I'm just going to be open and honest and say I'm still struggling with this, because looking at all the scriptures regarding about how God says He Himself is going to bring Israel back together in the land, it doesn't fit what the House of Rothschilds did in 1948 and what the United Nations did. So I don't know. I don't really know what to make of it. But there are legitimate Jews that are there. There are people from, I believe, the other tribes of Israel going to Israel and going there. So certainly it's something to be keeping our eye on. No doubt.
Well, let me toss my thought there in, because I think that while we all know that there are Jews that say they're Jews, but they are not, they're the synagogue of Satan. Okay?
Correct. Yes.
And that we're probably talking about the Sephardic Jews. But aside from that, we're still talking about the land of Israel, and that land hasn't changed. It's still there, and it was pretty clearly marked out.
Correct.
And so that judgment is not just coming upon the people of Israel. I mean, if you go to Daniel 9:24, know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince, and you look at that, and it's talking about the judgment on the people, but also upon the land. And there's other judgments talking about it. So my point is, I do think the Tetrads are probably talking about trouble coming to Israel. Okay, now let's take a look. What trouble do we know that's coming to Israel? Well, we know from Prophet Leslie that Israel will give the Palestinians a state, but it'll be a temporary measure to allow the Israelis time to strengthen the military. We also know that oil, massive amounts of oil will be discovered, and that oil will be used to build up Israel's military. We also know that then America is going to be hit with a catastrophe. Well, I'm going to skip part of it here, but essentially Israel will be attacked by her surrounding Arab neighbors. America sends troops, and of course then Russia attacks and defeats America. So, in my opinion, I think that those Tetrads in 14 and 15 could very easily be associated with Palestinian state and Israel being attacked, and World War III, or at least leading up to World War III. I still subscribe to 2040. About 2020 is closer. And I'm not setting any dates, so don't pick up any rocks. But, people want to throw rocks. But what I am trying to say is, being a good watchman, I think it is probably trouble in Israel, putting it generally.
Yeah, and I'm glad you worded it that way, because when I looked at what they were saying about 322:13, and what really caught my attention is they were speculating that that would be the abomination of desolation. And if you look at that, what Jesus said, he said, if you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let those who be in Judea flee to the mountains, right? Then he later says, pray that your flight be not in winter and not on the Sabbath. Well, if you go back and look on your calendar, 322:13, it was the day after winter and the day before a Sabbath, Saturday. So I was like, whoa, I mean, that's very interesting. So I'm speculating that the time of the 20-year cycle of the time of Jacob's trouble may have in fact started on March 22nd of this year, 322:13, which would coincide very nicely with what you just said, that things are going to really ramp up and there's going to be trouble for Israel as defined by the 12 tribes and, of course, the land itself.
Well, I think you've got some very interesting topics, and you folks want to go ahead and plan and make your schedules to come and hear Rob, as he is going to have some awesome information, and I already put a promo together to tell you the dates and everything, so we'll go ahead and go to there. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your prayers, and yes, thank you for your gifts of support. God bless. Now from the Prophecy Club, some exciting opportunities for you. In the Rob Skiba gift offer, his first DVD is Mythology, UFOs, and the Coming Great Deception. Topics are the origin of mythology and the gods, Sumerian, Egyptian, and Greek pantheons, the Coming Great Deception, UFOs and aliens, Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, interdimensional portals, transhumanism and the quest to be like gods, giants and hybrids, paganism in Washington, D.C., America's date with destiny, and in Babylon Rising, 322 Tetrads and the time of Jacob's trouble. The topics are the signs in the heavens, Babylon in the last days, New World Order conspiracies, secret societies, and the occult's obsession with the numbers 322, Tetrads, or blood red moons, in the eclipses in the days ahead, Jesus coming as a thief in the night, the feasts of God and how they relate to the last days, the tribulation survival plan, and 2045, the year man becomes immortal. Topics will be Genesis 6 Nephilim, hybrid humans, war with hybrids, hybrids among us, the injection of immortality. All 3 DVDs valued at $90, available for a gift of just $50 at prophecyclub.com. And Rob will be speaking Saturday afternoon, July the 20th from 2 to 5 p.m. and 7 to 10:30 p.m. And then Sunday morning beginning at 9:30 on those 3 DVDs. And that's on the corner of Park and K in Plano, 2540 K Avenue in Plano.